Hello, very nice that you're interested in this presentation. My name is Mariska Beukers. I'm Director Project Management at QPS in the Netherlands. And I will present you some slides on the execution of clinical trials during the COVID-19 pandemic. I was involved at QPS when we had a closure and also about the restart and until now, of course, where we do the clinical conduct. So I will give you some slides on how we do the execution of clinical trials. So on this slide, you see the impact of the COVID-19 situation in the Netherlands and how it impacted our site. So we were in a stay-at-home order since March 15 at the beginning of this year. So we kind of stopped all our clinical activities except for some patient studies, of which the patients were already enrolled or where we have some benefits to the patient. So that was only a few. So all other studies were cancelled or put on hold. And of course, we continued with the preparation of studies because we were, of course, preparing for the restart. Everyone was working from home and they continued work to be ready at the restart. So we had a lot of contact with our competent authority, with the ethics board, also together with our other CROs in the Netherlands to work together also with the competent authority. And on May 18, they approved the restart. The official restart needed to be approved by the ethical board per study. So we were prepared for that, and therefore we restarted again at May 28th. During the lockdown situation, we developed a COVID-19 plan, which is a global plan. So it was together, not only the Netherlands, but with all sites within QPS to work together and to have a plan ready for the restart. So we had everything in place. Well, the most important one is the mitigation of risks to subjects and staff. So that was our top priority. So personal protective equipment was in place, and we created a procedure for screening and also for clinical conduct. One other important aspect, which is now kind of normal, but at that time we really need to work on that, was testing. So COVID-19 testing was available at all sites. Every site worked with a local vendor. Yeah, so we get tested for subjects, but also for personnel. And of course, each site continued to follow the guidelines at that moment for both screening and clinical conduct. So some facts on the situation right now. So as mentioned, we started end of May again. We continued our clinical studies in the last 3-4 months. And during the summer months, we were quite okay in the Netherlands. But I would say the recent couple of weeks, we see an increase in the number of infections. And especially the Dutch government announced new measures on September 28th. Which was very recently, but most of the measures were not specifically for clinical activities. So there's right now no impact on the clinical activities. It was more that everyone needed to work from home, and there are a lot of new measures in the private situation, but not specifically on clinical activities. So for now, we can continue our work, of course, with all precautions taken, which I will show in the next slides. But yeah, still it's kind of difficult situation. We don't know what will happen, so we monitor it very closely. We have a working group following all the number of infections, of course, every week. We are also in close contact with the other CROs in the Netherlands to work together to harmonize our precautions to make sure that we do the same and that we are in alignment also with the competent authority. So, but for now, yeah, we can continue our work with all precautions we take at this moment. So as mentioned, we created a plan, which is a global plan, and This is the picture you see here, which is kind of maybe a complicated picture if you see it in the first time. But it's kind of I would say, a decision tree. You can see the flow, and how should we follow up on that. So it starts at the left with the phone screening. You see it in the left corner, in the left above corner. So, and you can continue with the arrows. So the most important one is, of course, questions. Check for COVID history. So if there is any history, or we think a subject has COVID-19, of course, then it's a phone screen failure. So that's what you see in gray. If there are no concerns, you can follow the arrow, and subjects will be invited to our screening center, which is a dedicated area separated from the clinical unit. We will start with a check for the COVID-19 symptoms, ask again any question. If there's any concern, then of course it's an on-site COVID-19 screen failure. If there are no symptoms, no concerns, we continue with the ICF and screening procedure, and that's what you see in the other pink box. Testing will only be done if it's required, so that's upon decision also with the sponsor. Of course, if it's a positive test, then it's a failure again. If it's no testing or negative, then we continue with the screening area, or the study criteria. We treat the subject, of course, as if they are infected at screening, because we do not always test at screening, so we treat them as infected. So then you come to the blue ones at the bottom at a first visit. So if it's not a screen failure based on the regular criteria, but everyone fulfills the criteria, then a subject continues in the study, will be invited, also again in a dedicated study unit, and then we will start with the test. So each subject come into the clinic for the study will be tested on COVID-19 with a PCR test. Normally the test is available within 24 hours. So we ask people to come in one day earlier in a separated area. If the test is negative, then subject can continue. Then you come to the dark blue boxes, and a subject can continue with the study. So this is like a flow which we follow during the study for a subject. Then some more detailed items on safety procedures. So we developed a questionnaire that will, as mentioned in the previous slide, we start already with screening by phone. So at that moment, the questionnaire will be taken by the member from the phone screen team. So, and the questionnaire, of course, with new information learned, we developed the questionnaire. So it's like an ongoing document. One other important item we developed is a specific COVID-19 ICF. So it's specifically with the COVID-19 measures. It's approved by the IRB, by the local ethical committee, and each subject will sign this or will explain, of course, first and then sign the ICF, just specifically mentioned for the COVID-19 situation. And the reason we have this as a separate document is that, of course, there's a lot of items ongoing with respect to COVID-19. So we can update this very quick. We get a separate approval and we can use it for each study. So it's kind of a general document. Well, to follow up on the safety procedures, of course, we have trained staff wearing personal protection. Cleaning, disinfection is of course very important. Social distancing where possible. So this is, I would say at the beginning, this was very unusual. Everyone needs to be trained, everyone get used to it. But in the meantime, after a couple of months, this is kind of the new normal for us. So people are getting used to it. As mentioned, we have an IRB approved COVID-19 ICF. And the last important bullet is the testing, which I already mentioned. So each site has it locally sourced. It will be completed at screening if required. That will be discussed with the sponsor up front. For sure, it will be done at admission. And very recently, we added a day +2 for a repeat COVID test to be absolutely sure that someone is negative. Dependent on the government guidelines, the staff can be tested as well, or if we, from a management perspective, think that's necessary, we can test staff as well. Okay, then about the regulatory, specifically on the COVID-19 situation. So we created 2 general documents, which is a protocol and an ICF. The protocol is an addendum to the protocol, which is a very general document applicable for each study. And this is the same as for the ICF. So we created 2 general documents. We have general approvals. We can use it for each study. If the situation changes from the COVID-19 situation and we need to adapt the protocol, we can easily adapt one protocol addendum instead of each study-specific protocol. Of course, this can also be discussed with the sponsor. So if the sponsor would like to have it in their protocol, that's of course an option. But this is more easy as we have a lot of protocols. So this is what we agreed upon with the ethics board as well. And one other important aspect is that the ethical committee would like to see a risk analysis per study. So there are some criteria which we have to check in the protocol if the PI is confident to execute this study in the COVID-19 situation. So we have kind of a standard form developed for the risk analysis, which will be filled in by the PI, can be reviewed by the sponsor. And that will also be sent to the ethics for notification. So they see we are aware of everything for this specific study at the risk analysis. Okay, then about the study execution during the pandemic situation. So about the screening procedures, we have a dedicated screening facility, which is very important because subjects will come in. We kind of treat them as infected. So it's very important to have that as a dedicated screening facility. Again, they will be questioned for COVID-19. If required by the government, subject will be asked not to use public transportation. That's what we had in the beginning of the situation. For now, that's not applicable, but it was after the closure, after the lockdown situation. We specifically needed to do this. Each subject that passes the COVID-19 criteria will be masked if applicable, and then the regular screening will be done after we are very sure that there is no COVID-19 risk anymore based on the criteria. And of course, we separate subjects from each other, so the facility will be cleaned and disinfected for the next subject to be screened. Well, then we have clinical conduct. So we have 3 dedicated units which are separated from each other. So at admission, people will be separated. We will do testing, we will do questioning. We treat them as infected. And as soon as the test is negative, we continue with the normal procedures from the study. So in the last bullet, you see that each clinic unit has its own dosing and stations, centrifuges, etc. So it's 3 separated units. Subjects are separated from each other to make sure that we can execute. We adhere to the social distancing, which resulted in a less bed capacity because we need to adhere to the 1.5 meter in the Netherlands for the social distancing. Well, I think this is, I would say nowadays, as normal. This was specifically at the beginning very unusual for everyone. So now we get used to it. So all QPS staff will follow the personal protective equipment. They need to wear masks, gloves, a coat. Everyone is trained in specific procedures. Everything is documented in a work instruction, SOP. So everyone is trained, and people need to follow these personal protective guidelines. And then a last slide on the testing capabilities. So QPS is using a PCR test. We work with our local safety lab. They can do the testing for us. Will be available within 24 hours. And as mentioned, we do the testing at least at admission, and tests will be repeated at day +2 to make sure that there is no infection. And everyone that is tested negative will continue. If there is a positive test, then of course we will follow the local guidelines or the regular guidelines, and we'll do contact research to follow up on any possible other infections to make sure that, well, of course we know who is a possible positive test. So we will follow up on that with contact research. And testing, yeah, is still part of the normal routine, I would say, in clinical conduct right now. So nurses are trained to do the swabs. So that works very well. So that was the last slide. So I would like to thank you for watching this presentation to the end. If you have any questions on clinical conduct, please reach out to myself or my colleagues, and we're more than happy to answer your questions. And thank you for watching this presentation.